Hello, my name is Jeff Buckhold and I'm with Duck and Cover Ministries. In these videos, we will discuss freedom from a practical, theological, and political standpoint. And often I will use quotes from famous people about the topic of freedom to start off the discussion. Today's quote is from the Frenchman Anthony the Saint of Exupéry. I apologize for my poor pronunciation. He is most famous for writing the book, The Little Prince. And he says, "I know but one freedom, and that is the freedom of the mind." By all standards, the freedom of the mind should be cherished above all other freedoms. It is more valuable than the freedom to vote. It is even more valuable than the freedom of expression. Although certainly a free mind which cannot express itself will be frustrated and miserable. One might assume that the freedom to think whatever one wants to think is a given. Sadly, that is far from the truth. Just like all other freedoms require certain stipulations to be in place before the freedoms can be enjoyed, so too freedom of thought needs certain things in place before one is free to think whatever thoughts they want. But let's back up. There are many people and groups who, while they may not openly admit it, loathe freedom of thought. Not everyone is okay with average people being free to think about important topics from various perspectives. For heaven's sake, China and the former USSR were infamous for their re-education camps. These centers to help the dissenters fix themselves were in fact forced labor camps meant to work people to death who had ideas not supported by the regime. The goal was to kill dissenters or make them so miserable they'd submit to communist propaganda. But a government does not need to use forced labor to quench freedom of thought. Anyone or any government who replaces education with indoctrination hates freedom of thought. You see, I guess there are two basic requirements needed for people to truly have freedom of thought. The two requirements for freedom of thought are access to a good education and access to honest information. I suppose these two requirements need a little fleshing out. Education, in its most essential form, shouldn't be an enterprise designed to tell students what to think. Education's primary function, if students are going to have freedom of the mind, is to teach them how to think. In order to enjoy freedom of thought, students must be taught how to analyze issues and how to contemplate solutions to these issues. This is one reason why an emphasis on math is crucial. Math teaches students how to analyze and solve simple problems in a logical manner. But telling a child what to think or manipulating them to reach a predetermined conclusion, well, that's not education. It is indoctrination, and it robs the student of freedom of thought. Legitimate questions, even uncomfortable ones, must be encouraged and addressed. If a sincere question is mocked and the asker is belittled, then education is not taking place. It is indoctrination. You see, I think that freedom of the mind is not necessarily a natural occurrence. A mind must be cultivated in order for it to truly think and be free. Look, all people will think whatever they want to think. No government has developed mind control yet. So all people are free in a simplistic sense to think whatever they want. Even if someone is forced to say certain things, it is no guarantee that they think those things are true. So from that standpoint, all people are born with the God-given right to think whatever they want. But I contend that for the freedom of the mind to be fully embraced, that mind must be cultivated. Think of it like this. In America, we all have the Second Amendment right to arm ourselves, to defend ourselves from lawlessness and tyranny, so anyone can buy a gun. There is a certain amount of freedom all citizens possess. But what good is the freedom to bear arms if the person who owns the gun doesn't know how to use it? To truly utilize the freedom to bear arms, one must know how to load the gun, aim, shoot the gun, how to maintain it. Otherwise, the gun is nothing more than a dangerous paperweight. What I'm saying is the freedom to bear arms needs some cultivating to be truly utilized. Likewise, I think a human mind needs a lot of cultivating in order to truly utilize the freedom of thought that everyone is born with. The mind is a powerful tool with so much potential, but people need to be taught, for the lack of a better phrase, how to use their brain. People need to learn how to think, how to question, how to contemplate and analyze. This should be the goal of any educational system that values freedom. If an educational system's primary concern is producing uniformity of thought, they are not encouraging free-thinking minds. They are instead focused on producing a product that those in power demand. Any educational system that opposes debate, dissent, and questions is not teaching children how to think. They are trying to control what they think. But knowing how to think is not enough to fully enjoy freedom of thought. One needs reliable access to information, news, and ideas. Think of it this way. If you have no news or access to opposing ideas, you will have precious little to think about. Or worse, suppose you are fed misinformation and caricatures of opposing viewpoints. Then your thoughts will be skewed in the direction of whoever is issuing the misinformation. They have stacked the deck, so to speak. Information, in one sense, in the Western world comes from journalists. Either from traditional journalists or increasingly from journalists on the internet. If the journalist believes in the principle of freedom of thought, there is usually no problem. Such a journalist will honestly present the facts and fairly share opposing views. He or she will present the information as objectively as possible and let the viewer think through their own response. But if the journalist does not value freedom of thought, they will simply give the viewer propaganda that supports their own personal convictions. This makes it much more difficult for the average person to think clearly about issues, since the reporting is muddied with so much spin. But I fear there is an even greater threat to the freedom of thought associated with journalism in America. Modern journalism is dominated by money and ratings. Or, to put it another way, better ratings equals a lot more money. This forces modern journalists to be salespeople. They don't give viewers the news, they sell consumers a product. And the best product to sell is scandal and controversy. The truth is often boring, and often fair coverage of issues equals poor ratings. People who are outraged keep tuning in to get their emotional fix. Big money has also damaged the cause of fair reporting. Many powerful and rich people invest billions in media news outlets. They do not always do this because they value freedom of thought. Often, they have an agenda. They have an ideology that they think the world should embrace, and so they buy media outlets and turn them into propaganda machines. This means our access to information is tainted. It is very hard to get a fair coverage, let alone the facts of a situation. This means that our mind is not free to decide on its own what is right and wrong about an issue. Instead, our minds are automatically biased toward the views of the people manipulating statistics and events to support their own ratings or their own ideologies. Freedom of thought really is the foundation of all other freedoms and rights. So if education and journalism are used as political tools to promote the agenda of those in power, then the populace cannot be free in any meaningful sense. The fight to preserve our freedom to think must be taken to the college and university campuses of America. But the fight doesn't sizzle. It's not exciting, because this fight is over the philosophy of education and the philosophy of journalism. We need to reestablish the belief that both education and journalism serve society by promoting freedom of thought. The premise that education is nothing more than a tool to engineer children so they embrace certain ideologies must be abandoned. And journalists must be retaught that their sacred duty to all people who want to be free is to cover a story as fairly as they can. Well, thank you for listening, and if you would like to join in our discussion on freedom, please leave a comment and hit the subscribe button and the bell to stay up to date with the conversation on this topic. To God be the glory. Until next time.